everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Power 365 show, a show where I interview key Microsoft staff and get their views on what's happening with the technology they're responsible for. I'm pleased to introduce Ashvini Sharma, the product manager of Power Automate team. He joins us today to talk about RPA and how that works with Power Automate. Before we start, let's have a quick chat about sales engagement. It's technology that allows salespeople to close more deals faster in a predictable manner. I'm part of a new startup called SalesSpark, and we have built a Power App that allows sales engagement to work on CDS or with Dynamics 365 Sales. If you want to try sales engagement in your sales team in 2020, go to salesspark.com or contact me directly. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/176. Now let's get on with the show. Ashvini, welcome to the Power 365 show.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
It's good to have you on the call. I always like talking to folks from Microsoft that are deep in a particular, product or application area. In your case, it's robotic process automation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exciting new areas for us.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we get there, let's just find out a bit about you. First of all, what part of the world do you hail from? Where do you live? And what do you do when you're not working?
That's a complicated question. I was born in India, and I left India when I was 12. We went to Middle East in a city called Dubai. I was in Dubai for 5 years, and then I came to the US to do my undergraduate when I was 17.
Okay, so what part of the US did you land in?
Oh, I went to a university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And the name of the university is called Carnegie Mellon. And I had no idea. I was doing computer science, and I had no idea that I thought Mellon meant it was an agricultural school because it had the word melon in it. And I kept wondering, okay, why am I going to an agricultural school to learn computer science? That makes no sense to me. And only when I came here did I realize, no, it's actually in a pretty good engineering school. So that's what I ended up doing.
So now you've mentioned the word melon. What does it mean in relationship to this university?
Well, the university was founded by two people, Andrew Carnegie and Andrew Mellon. And it was just a last name.
Got you. Yeah, I recognize the Carnegie, but not the Mellon. So I take it whoever that person was, they must have been, what were they, big in business or for them to form a university?
Yeah, I think Carnegie was, railroad, steel was what he was known for. Yeah, and
definitely.
Mellon Finance. In fact, there is a Mellon Bank as well here in the US. So that's where they came from.
Wow, there you go. I've learned some more about the US. So what happened? Did you go in an internship or what after being at uni?
Oh, after the university, I worked in a different company in Michigan, and it was all around the area at that time was called business intelligence or decision support systems, and that's where I started in Michigan for working at a company doing this. So I was a developer building add-ins to Excel and Lotus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lotus 1, 2, 3, eh?
That's right. It was still hot back then. That's right.
Yeah. I've not come across it in years now. It seems to have finally been disappearing.
I think I'm showing my age at this point. It's been it was a long time back, yes.
Yeah, I mean, do you ever come across Notes still being in use? That was another Lotus product, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Once in a while, I think. No, I don't hear Notes often enough anymore.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what brought you into Microsoft?
Oh, well, at the time, I joined Microsoft in 97. And at that time, Microsoft was just starting this BI business. And I'd been working on in this BI group for about 3 years outside Microsoft. And the late 90s, Microsoft was the place to be if you had to do anything with software. And I just realized if Microsoft is entering this business, it is just going to fundamentally shift what people expect from this market. And it just, this whole thing that we talk about democratization, that is going to happen. And I'd rather be at Microsoft being part of this rather than suffering outside, being threatened by it. So yeah, that's how I joined in December of 97 as a tester on a version 1 product we were working on, which became part of our BI offering as part of SQL Server.
Wow, incredible. So I take it you live in Redmond now. What do you are you into skiing? What's your kind of activities when you're not at work type thing?
Yeah, that's right. I live in Redmond and I love hiking. So we are blessed here with lots of good mountains around here and good greenery, and I just enjoy, especially when the weeks get tough and you just want to recharge. There's no better thing for me than just going out for a walk on the hills here. So that's what I usually end up doing.
Yeah, very nice. So tell us about so you came in from a BI perspective in SQL back then, and how did you end up now part of the business applications team?
I stuck with BI until March of last year. And then I started looking at it. It's been 20-something years since I was doing BI. And I thought, you know what, now is the time for a change. I probably want to jump into something completely new. And that's how I started looking around. And the Power Automate, or at that time, the Flow team was starting the Robotic Process Automation initiative. And I thought, hey, let's have that a go. Let's see how we can start on another V1. So that's
that makes sense. How much crossover have you found, like lessons learned in your 20 years in BI, that you've been able to apply to RPA now?
That's a great question, because I think the time when I started BI, it was a domain of specialists, and you had to be someone deep in working with data and optimizing resources and building solutions just perfectly to be able to then put it in front of some other users. And those other users would, we used to call them Fisher-Price UIs, which is just very big, blocky UIs, where buttons would turn red or buttons would turn green. But this whole notion of there are specialists that build this for everybody else to consume. And we went through a journey on the BI side where there was an emergence of self-service analytics, where there were tools like Tableau or ClickView and these other tools that allow, even Excel, that allowed people to connect to data and reason over that data and do analysis for themselves and then share them with others. And it's I see a very similar playbook playing out in the world of automation as well, where it's similarly there's specialists that are building automations and they're just making sure everything is perfect, your machine resolution is right, and there's no pop-ups that pop up. And it's just, moving that, advancing the technology enough so that end users can build automation for themselves instead of having to rely on these specialists. I think we're going through, so that's definitely a playbook I'm seeing playing out in this space of RPA. And then, of course, it's the muscles that you build up around strategy and how do you approach a market and how do you think competitively. I think all of them transfer directly.
So that is interesting. And I take it you are once again got kind of an end goal that RPA will be able to be done by anybody, that you wouldn't necessarily have to have a massive background in automation or something like that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's our pitch. And I think one of the things we did with BI also was there was a corporate BI world and the self-service BI world. And what we did there was create this managed self-service world, where the whole difference there was instead of having these silos of independent people working on their desk, you had a centralized system that was able to enable your enterprise to be able to do analytics themselves, but also govern because you're giving all these people tools and you're encouraging them to build analysis. But then you had to make sure the data wasn't getting misused. It wasn't leaking out. People were using the right set of reports and what is authoritative versus what is an ad hoc. So you had to build all the sophistication into a platform to be able to scale with control and visibility and confidence. And that same thing with RPA as well. I see this going into a managed automation service for an enterprise where there are new roles that will be created for saying, okay, great, I want to enable the rest of my enterprise to be able to automate the mundane tasks themselves, but I want to still put guardrails and I want to put best practices and evangelize and have visibility into what are people doing. And are they misusing the automation services that I'm giving to them, or do we have the right controls in place? So I think that's absolutely right. The managed RPA, I think that's definitely a place that I think the industry needs to move to.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot of people that don't necessarily know what RPA is. How do you describe it?
That's a great question. When I started a year back, I was asking around, hey, what is RPA? And different people gave me different answers on what they thought RPA was. In fact, when I was talking to different analysts in the same company were giving me different answers back as well. And it reminded me of back a few years back, we had this whole big data or the cloud buzzwords. And, I was working on the big data project and we would meet customers. They would come in and say, we want to hear about Microsoft's big data strategy. And we would ask them, hey, what do you want to do? And customers would say, I don't know. What can I do? What do you allow me to do? And there was this massive confusion about what is this term, big data? And I see a similar analogy here on the RPA terms as well. And people are misusing it at times. So what I hear from analysts that are purists is there is a need to allow customers to automate systems that don't have any APIs with them.
So is this a scenario where they're wanting to extend the life of an application, let's say a 10, 15-year-old application, that they don't want to retire it, so they need some automation across it, and so this is where RPA comes in?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, many of these systems were built as point solutions at a time, and they're doing exactly what they were designed to do. It's just that the business is now moving faster, and business users are saying, I'm spending so much time doing work on this, and help me do something else and help the software do this. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
One of the airports in Europe, I was speaking with just a few months back, and what they have is a report that they generate for each employee on the compliance. What training has this employee taken? And this system was built a few years back, and the airport has grown a lot since then. And the training that employees have to take has also grown a lot since then. So right now, when this lady I was speaking with on the call was showing me the experience of this application where you type in the employee information and then you press a button for generate a report. And that button takes 10 minutes to run now. And so I asked, okay, what do you do in the meantime? Because you're generating these reports. And there's just, there's long coffee breaks, or you end up focusing on something else, and you context switch, and then you come back whenever you remember the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So that's an example. And they have a team of 4 people whose job it is to generate these reports, because you need to be compliant. Your employees need to be compliant. So that's a great example of a legacy application. It probably didn't used to take 10 minutes when it was designed before, but now it is taking that long. And instead of having a human wait for it, if a bot can wait instead, then the bot can wait as long, and I can do something more productive with my time. So that's an example of UI automation that is necessary for people to be able to do other stuff that they're being asked to do.
That's a great example. Tell me, what type of technology that you're seeing RPA applied over? What is the underlying technology? Like, I used to work in Fox Pro systems, for example, and I could see it easily working in those old type systems. What other kind of older technology is out there where RPA used in let's say an application's being built on that technology, RPA would be usable. What are some of those high level names or technologies that you're seeing that lend itself to having RPA applied?
Yeah, so I see clusters of different scenarios. I definitely see rich Windows applications, and they could have been written in, I don't know, VB6 or MFC or Delphi, or the whole. We went through a wave of these technologies a few years back, and those applications haven't gone away. So I see a lot of those. I also see browser websites. These are intranet sites when ASP.NET and the Java-based experiences were in vogue. And a lot of IT teams built this way of deploying applications without having to physically have them running in different places. So I see a lot of web cases as well. Many of these are intranet sites that are running. Then I also see in certain cases like banking and insurance, I see mainframes. And governments, I see a lot of mainframes as running, and they want to automate these interactions with those. And emerging, and this is where it gets to how we see RPA as beyond just UI automation. The state of the art and the technology has advanced enough where there are modern apps and services that could be running on the cloud or running on premises that do have APIs now available. So an application like Excel running on my desktop, well, Excel has a rich set of APIs that are available from Microsoft in the cloud as well. And a lot of customers don't think of that as API surface available. They just think of it as the UI automation is the approach that I'm going to take because I can see how I automate this application. So being able to have a holistic platform that's able to span through all of these different automation needs, we think is critical as our customers evolve towards incrementally moving to a more modern systems.
Yeah, excellent. So just to reiterate there, you're talking about Windows-based application, VB6, MFC, or Delphi-based websites, commonly intranets built on ASP.NET or Java-based applications. And then in a couple of those industries there, banking, insurance, government, which, I've definitely come across them there, the mainframe environments, in play that they still want to keep sweating those assets yet. And,
right.
Can't swap them out. Anything else?
Those are the bulk of, and I think within them there are, there's some Java variants, or sometimes people deploy them in a virtual environment. So they could be running in Citrix or remote desktop or VMware. But those are just deployment technologies. These are usually the class of applications that I see. Yeah. Yeah,
that's brilliant. That's definitely cleared things up in my mind. Tell me. What's the history of RPA? Who has been doing it out there? So not so much a history in Microsoft, but the history of the industry in this space.
Yeah, so RPA was, I think the term itself was coined by a company called Blue Prism last 2 decades back. And they've been around for a while. They're a public company now and a great Microsoft partner as well. And a lot of the automation vendors, RPA has gone through a renaissance in the last few years, where a lot of people just acknowledge that there is a need for these automation applications. And a lot of the what used to be test tools for validating if you have any regressions in your applications are now coming back to the automation space as saying, hey, we can do automation as well, because that is in fact what they were doing with testing previously. So another vendor, Automation Anywhere, used to be, I believe, called Test Anywhere, and they are pretty one of the big vendors in the RPA space, is because there are a lot of similarities between test systems and automation systems. And many of the tools that are foundations that they're built on top of are test foundations. So, or similar foundations that are used for testing tools as well. So that's one source, one asset that is getting used by the RPA market. Another one is the accessibility. If I am not able to see properly, then I probably use a screen reader of some sort. And the screen reader does something very similar to what automation needs to do, which is go through the controls that are in my application, describe these controls, allow me to interact with these controls, allow me to enter values or read values back from these controls. So a lot of these, at least on Windows, most of the RPA vendors that provide resilient automation rely on the accessibility interfaces to be able to do it.
Resilient automation. What do you mean by that?
Resilient. I mean, you can do automation in a variety of different ways. I guess the most simplistic and naive way would be to look at a coordinate, an XY coordinate on your screen,
right.
and just click that button every time. Right? But that, of course, as your app changes, as your resolution or scale changes, it just your button moves, and then you may be clicking the wrong thing. So that's one technique, which is which there are some vendors that provide XY fallback as well. There are other techniques you could say, which is for building more robust automation. You can ask the application, "Hey, application, please describe the controls that I am now clicking."
Right.
So that when I tell you later on, this is the button I clicked, you will know which button I mean because you told me that was the button. So that approach, which is the same path through the accessibility APIs, that inherently gives you a much more robust way of defining playbacks or of doing playbacks on automation, because it is now less sensitive to your resolution or layout, your screen layout, etc. And that's what I mean by more resilient automation, because you're trying to have, instead of complete surface level, you're trying to work with the application hand in hand to be able to describe the controls that you want to automate.
Yeah. So just as you're talking about that, you're talking about accessibility APIs, but let's say a mainframe environment didn't have an accessibility API. Is the only fallback for you that XY coordinate based interacting with those older systems?
Yeah, so text-based systems have a different model. That's right. The accessibility ones are usually for the Windows-based approach, but the text-based, you're absolutely right. For text-based, I don't even use a mouse. I probably use my keyboard, and I have a whole bunch of shortcuts.
Totally.
And I know that row number 23 means row number, whatever that data means. So for text-based automation, usually what you end up doing is having a lot more focus on key input and scraping values out from the screens, and being able to then parse. I want the 15th through the 32nd character out of row 25.
Right.
So you end up having those kinds of techniques to rely on, less so than accessibility.
It reminds me of regex back in the day of extracting data from strings. Okay, so
yes.
So we talked about accessibility APIs, text-based. Anything else that kind of around that kind of core technology area that comes into play?
Yeah, I think on the browser side, you can imagine a world where the DOM itself, the browser content itself, is available for automation to understand what are the buttons to click and where do you enter the value. And in addition to all of these, there is also an approach for vision, where vision can come into play as well. So with the state of the art of AI advancing enough, what you can then say is, hey, don't worry about what the internal structure of this application or this website is. I'm telling you to look for a button or a control that looks like this. And wherever that is on the screen, find this control, and then based on an offset from that image, I want you to click on it or read a value, OCR a value out, etc.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's another technique of falling back, especially if the application doesn't participate in the accessibility or doesn't provide a rich context of the controls. Then this is another area of exploration for the industry. How do you make sure that image-based processing is also resilient? Because by default, you could just imagine, okay, this is my bitmap, and I look for this bitmap exactly the same way. But then if my resolution changed, or my scale is different, or my theme is now different, it's the dark theme instead of light theme, then I might not find that image anymore. So there's a lot of black art today that goes into tweaking the thresholds of, this it's 75% match, and then I consider that to be a hit, which just can be a little onerous and hard to do for building resilient automation.
Yeah. What type of systems is just a no-go? So if you had a use case come up to you and you took a look at it and you're like, actually, this is outside the scope of what we do, kind of, are you seeing anything like that come in, as in, be requested? And what are the type of technologies that RPA it won't work or won't apply? And that's based on someone trying to use this technology to achieve an outcome, expecting that it would do it. Is there any scenarios that are not supported?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a sweet spot for RPA, and there are things that are outside the sweet spot. I'd say things outside the sweet spot would be if there are applications that are changing so dynamically that your automation can just not keep up.
Right.
So usually these tend to be consumer websites that like
a Facebook.
Like a Facebook, or Amazon's, or there are captures in the way, and the pages themselves are very dynamic, and many of these services prevent you from running through a bot, and they detect you're a bot, and so just these things get in the way of building, again, resilient automation. On the business side, I see less of this. Most of these applications are fairly static. By definition, they are just working, so nobody wants to touch them. And the sweet spot, and that's why RPA is such a unique, it's a perfect storm, because it has technology that's designed for applications that are not changing as much, which is what we find in most enterprise applications. So I'd say if you had an application that was more on the spectrum towards the consumer website that's changing rapidly, then probably RPA tools, you'd be disenchanted by using those. But if it's fairly static, then that's probably a pretty good use for those.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So, what are the tools, and what are the key building blocks of Microsoft Power Automate's RPA implementation? Yeah.
So our RPA, what our pitch is, or what our strategy is with Power Automate, is to provide a holistic end-to-end automation platform. So as I was going through and I was defining, hey, we could, if you have API services like Excel or email or Salesforce, then being able to automate those together with AI. So if you had invoices coming in, for example, and you wanted to apply AI to extract data from those invoices, I can absolutely do that as part of Power Automate as well. And then if I had UI, then I can use a feature called UI Flows, which is currently in preview, that we announced in November. For automating both browser and Windows applications. And many of these systems cannot be completely automated 100% by the software. And we believe what you want is a system and a human working together, where the system can offload as much of the processing as it can, but then it asks the human to make a decision where it's best for a human to make a call. So in the case for invoice processing, for example, I could say I have a new invoice that shows up in email, and whenever that shows up, I want to extract that out and extract the contents of the invoice using AI Builder in our case. And whenever that content is extracted, then I want to send it to a Teams channel for approval. And whenever the person decides that approval, maybe Friday afternoon is when I make all my approval decisions, the system is just waiting for me to get to it. And as soon as I make the call, then the system continues on from there. So generally, going back to your question about how do we define RPA, the way the customers come to us is with these needs that span all of these capabilities. And then we work with them to say, what are the best tools in the toolbox available for you to be able to use these? Is it one of those 300 plus connectors that we provide in Power Automate? Maybe you don't need any UI automation. Or is it a custom AI model you've built and you want to plug that into your automation? So having this portfolio that people can select from has been just a key value prop for us.
So what's the sweet spot? As in, where are you seeing customers or even industries that are like, they're on board, they get it, they have this need, this problem in their organizations, they can see that it potentially can save a lot of hours of manual, people type work doing kind of boring, mundane activities.
Yep.
Do you see any sweet spots starting to present themselves?
Yeah, I do see a few clusters forming, and I think the way I look at the space is, it's hard for me to do in a podcast, but if you think of a 2x2 grid,
yep,
and you say on one axis you have citizen developers and center of excellence, on the other axis you have attended RPA or unattended RPA. Right? Attended RPA being, I'm sitting in front of the machine and I just want task completion. I want it to do something faster for me. Whereas unattended being just working in a back office somewhere. I don't even know it's working.
Yeah.
Then between those four cells, there are definitely scenarios that are popping. So for the case of citizen developers doing attended automation, many of them want to do web scraping. I've got this bunch of data spread across different tables and different websites. Instead of copying, pasting in, can I just make it easier for me to do? For the case of citizen developer in unattended, okay, I'm closing my books at the end. I'm creating a P&L statement and just needs consolidation across these whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets I've got. And I just want to go do that as quickly as possible. Or the top right on the center of excellence attended, these are cases where I may have a large call center and my call center has agents that have to do exactly the same thing over and over again for every call. And I want to give them automation to be able to, or claims processing or invoice processing would be the center of excellence in unattended. And so I'm seeing these clusters and each one of these has different needs, different personas you're going after, different expectations that customers have.
So, and are you seeing like the interaction between type of those mainframe systems and Windows systems? Like I used to work in a bank and we had a mainframe environment and then we had a Windows-based environment, which was used generally to have the conversational, the people interaction part of what the bank was doing. But anytime we needed to go to, accounts or anything regarding, mortgages or anything like that, we would have to grab a little bit of data from one, switch into this old, totally keyboard-driven environment.
Yes, that's right.
Drop a bit of data in, and then a bit of data would need to be Control C, Control V'd out into the Windows application. So, this was years ago, but it's obviously imprinted on my brain as something that was driving me nuts at the time. So is that a use case for this?
Yes, I think you could be a very well-employed RPA automation specialist right now.
Yeah.
No, that is absolutely right. I think this mixture between Windows and web and mainframe. For mainframe, we also see a lot of data is locked up in mainframes. And to be able to build reports out of what the data sets that we got, there are some very specialized set of tools for doing exports, but just automating that process of exporting data from mainframe, which is another place where mainframes and Windows together work quite well. Yes, I do see a lot of span between both of them. Now, for the public preview, we don't yet support mainframe automation in Power Automate. But those are definitely scenarios that I hear from customers as well.
Yeah, very good. So are there any best practices or patterns that you're starting to see when people are implementing Power Automate?
Yeah, I think many of them are concepts around managing complexity, which is, hey, just understand inherently UI automation is a lot more fragile than API orchestration, and use it as a last resort wherever possible, right? As just our biggest guidance. Even though
Wow, that's interesting.
yeah, because there's so many things just go wrong with UI automation,
Yeah.
right? Your buttons move, you get new notifications of Office helping you or Windows saying there's a new update available, and you just need to manage these images and you need to deploy your new software. So it's a complex minefield, can be. So just avoid it wherever possible.
Yeah.
But then if you have to do it, then there are rules to just keep your UI automation as constrained as possible. So which is, don't have UI automation that just has 2,000 steps that it is executing one after another. Break this out into reusable components so that it's just like how you would not advise anybody to write a function that has 2,000 lines in it.
Yeah.
Right? Break it out into chunks and do error handling within those chunks. So all the best practices that customers are used to for building resilient, reusable automation pieces transfers here as well. And then from a governance perspective, it is exactly the same model that we have with Power Automate, which is all this data that we have is getting stored in CDS, and you can do solutioning, you can do exports or version control, and you can do governance as part of that. So just those are the best practices around using the tools that are available for governance, also for UI flows, because at the end of the day, UI flow is just another flow. So all that accrues.
So anything around, making sure that public networks and private networks or APIs into those are not being crossed over, etc., all apply here. This is
That's right.
Is another tool in the bag. Are you seeing anything around Office 365 and then into CDS, scenarios with Power Automate specifically in the RPA area?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, for almost, if I had to randomly guess any arbitrary RPA process and pick an application that is probably at the heart of that RPA process, I would pick two, and I'll probably be right majority of the time. It would either be Excel or it would be SAP.
Wow.
There's so many systems where Excel becomes your repository for doing a lot of either your destination or your source. And working with Excel files is a very common request on the RPA market. In fact, most RPA vendors provide Excel connectors out of the box that help you reason over data in Excel files. For that reason. And similarly for SAP as well. SAP is another common one that shows up a lot. So definitely we do hear from customers wanting to automate the documents. Of course, email shows up very frequently with Office 365, right? I want to send an email. I want to get an email. I want to watch for an email that's showing up. In fact, this morning I was on a call with a customer that's using a different product than Power Automate. And they have a bot that just wakes up every 5 minutes and watches and sees if there's a new email shows up or if there's a new document that's added to a SharePoint folder. So that those situations come up. Of course, in the Power Automate world, you wouldn't have to have this constant polling. You would just wait for the trigger. Right? Or a new email that contains this filter or a new document in SharePoint, then do this. But those are the kinds of scenarios there. And then I also hear about Dynamics as well. Folks want to be able to enter data in Dynamics using automation, and there again we have discussions with them on, hey, let's try to guide you towards using APIs, because there are a good set of APIs available for Dynamics, and that's where people come to us for UI automation, and we're able to most of the time say, APIs are a better way of doing it. Let's show you how.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought with Dynamics, and I'm speaking in the CE side of things, that there would be a need for RPA to put data in, because you're right, rich set of APIs are available. But I can imagine that wherever the source was, there would be different source applications where there would potentially be a need to update data in Dynamics, using RPA. what level of coding do I need to have to get started with RPA? Do I need to be a developer, or is this something that fits in the category of more declarative type development, and citizen developers can really start getting their hands around this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the industry itself is moving towards a more citizen-friendly experiences. Generally, just because of the fragility of UI automation, it does end up requiring a little bit more sophistication than your typical citizen developer. As a general statement. And then there are always vendors that are pulling in towards more democratized experiences. And that's one of the things I actually feel pretty good about is what we released as a public preview in November for Windows. Feels like it's straddling those two personas pretty well for Windows applications. Where it's able to provide a simplified experience for recording and playing back, an experience that's very consistent with the rest of Power Automate. So the design language is the same, the way you manage it is the same, the way you store and govern it is the same. So we're trying to our goal is to be able to bring more of the citizen developers that are either part of the Power Platform today or new that are coming to the Power Platform to be able to do automation on their own.
I like it.
And on the on the browser side is slightly more complicated than I'd like it to be right now. It's using Selenium IDE, which is an open source tool used primarily for testing that we have been working with the open source community to bring it in for doing web automation. And I'd say that one is a slightly more technical than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I look forward to making it easier.
Excellent. It's good to hear this roadmap there. Why did Microsoft decide to get into RPA? Was it, and these are the two scenarios that run through my mind. One, there was a demand. In other words, Microsoft customers were saying, hey, why aren't you guys offering this? Or two, was it opportunistic? And when I think of opportunistic, I think of field service, for example. Most of companies that had implemented some form of field service was a bespoke type implementation. So there was no clear vendor in the market that owned that category. And so Microsoft went after it and very successfully, has created massive growth in that space. What was the view for RPA from Microsoft's perspective in going after the space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say it's more of the first of what you mentioned, which for the longest time we've had the opinion, as did many in the industry, that at the heart of digital transformation is modernizing your systems so they have well-defined APIs that are just well architected and scale on demand. And there was a realization a couple of years back that the pace of this re-architecting your existing solutions that are working is just at a pace that it's going to take many years before organizations can be in this nirvana state where everything is just these microservices that are scale-free and they're just are state-free and they're just independently running at planet scale. And in the meantime, customers have these systems that they need to be able to automate until they're modernized. And there was one person I was speaking with last year, and they were speaking about how before automation came in, they were just underwater; they couldn't keep up. And now they've modernized their systems, and now they're saying, "Hey, my mental state is I'm not so far behind anymore." Because this technology allowed me to catch up. And that's what we were hearing from customers when we started this project is, this Power Automate and the flow at the time, or the citizen enablement, that's righteous, that's right. And please give us a way to be able to bridge our legacy systems, whether they're running on premises or in the cloud, with these modern systems that we're also building, and allow us to have one unified experience of automating across them. So it was more the customers asking us to go into this market than for us to be able to do something opportunistic.
I like that, bridging that old technology with the modern, and it is that tool, right? Is for that. I love it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So what about AI? What's involvement does AI have in what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so I think there is definitely a component today already in the Power Platform, which is called AI Builder. And what AI Builder is designed to do is bring the power of AI in the specific scenarios that we've heard from customers are very frequently enough scenarios, and make it available for citizen developers out of the box. So this the notion of invoice processing, which is what I mentioned before. Well, there's a forms processing model for doing that, or there's a text classification model, or an object detection model, etc. There are many models that are available out of the box. And there's a guided experience that leads people through building these models without knowing any data science or Python or advanced concepts. So once you build such a model using AI Builder, then you can integrate it inside a Power App or inside Power Automate. So you could take a picture of a container that has some letters on it, and have AI Builder extract the container ID, for example, in a Power App. Or you could say the invoice example that I had, which is process extract content from invoice. So that's one scenario of applying AI and taking it out of this this ethereal concept, this abstract concept of thing, into very practical applications. The second one, vision, is another area where we talked about how you could use vision for automating experiences as well, especially if they don't have any rich application context like the accessibility tree available. And that's a second approach where we are looking at how do we apply vision to be able to automate experiences as well.
Yeah, very good. Well, what quick wins can people expect, or should they go after? What's a low-hanging fruit right now? If people are listening to this and are thinking about their own companies or the companies they work with, what are some kind of, in their mind, they could run through and go, do I have this scenario? Hey, there's an opportunity. Or do I have that scenario? There's an opportunity. What would be on your checklist there?
Yeah, so I'd say things that frustrate you are usually things that you're just banging your head on. No, here I have to do this thing again. And it's just such a repeated chore. And it's predictable. And oh boy, every Monday morning I have to do this thing, or before I go home I have to do this thing. Those are usually categories of, there's high amount of pain, and there's not a lot of value that you're getting out of it. Yeah. So I think philosophically, if we could plant a meme, which is, if you're feeling frustrated by doing something repeatedly, ask yourself the question, can I use RPA for doing this? Nice. Usually, and that is generally, that's the bucket that most people can get quick wins into. Yeah. I'll tell you an example. One of the example I ran into was another customer we were speaking with, and they had a scenario of a file folder full of XLS files that they wanted to convert to XLSX. Okay. Wow. And that's a mundane task. It's just open the file, save as XLSX, and that's a very simple example of something that would have taken a person just a lot of time to do manually. Yeah, totally. I call it the repeatable mundane. Yes, that's right. That's right. The repeatable, boring parts of work. That's right. The higher the frustration level, the better use for RPA. Yeah. What happens around pricing? Is it just priced as part of the flow routines that you get inside Power Automate, as in the volume, that you get per individual, or how's it priced? Yeah, great question. We haven't yet announced pricing. Okay. We'll announce the pricing within the next few weeks. And generally, it will be an add-on to Power Automate, but the specifics of the pricing we'll get into in a few weeks. Excellent. No problem at all. Resources. Where can people find out how to start developing their skill set in the space? Obviously, docs on Microsoft would be a starting point. Is there anything else? Are there forums set up? What are the resources for people to get going with this? Yeah, that's right. So I think in Power Automate, as soon as you log on to Power Automate, in the top right corner, there's a question mark that has a whole bunch of different links, including the link to the forum, the community, as well as documentation getting started. I've seen most customers, when I speak with RPA generally, then the scenario of invoice processing really resonates with them. And one of the things we did with that, because it was resonating so much, is we created a Microsoft Mechanics video, where I walk people through creation of this API plus AI plus approvals plus UI automation, and that's something that if you want to get a quick overall view of what is Power Automate in this space, I think that's a great video to watch as well.
I like it. Before we go to some quickfire questions, is there anything else you want to add?
I am looking forward to people trying UI flows, and please send us feedback. The devil is in the detail with UI automation, and the faster we can get feedback on scenarios that customers want or bumps you're running into, I would just love to improve the product incrementally as quickly as we can. Awesome. So I'm looking forward to that.
I like it. Okay, you ready for some quickfire questions?
Sure thing, yes.
Now these are random, right? From any part of life. They're not necessarily related to work, but they're meant to stimulate thinking, not just by you, but also our audience. So the first one, would you rather win the lotto or the lottery or live twice as long?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Quickfire, live twice as long.
Same here. What are you most looking forward to in the next 10 years?
I am looking forward to having my kids get to college and have a great start on the next phase of their life. I
love it. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is "My heart is in the work" by Andrew Carnegie.
Wow. I didn't know that came from Andrew Carnegie. What's something you did as a child that your parents still retell the story about?
Well, I accidentally tried to burn the house down.
Wow!
And they make sure I remember whenever I'm next to fire that I tried to do that once.
Classic. If you could live in a sitcom, which one would it be and why?
Sitcom. That's a good one. I'm watching it's not a sitcom. Good Place is an interesting one. We just started, my wife and I just started watching The Good Place.
Okay.
And that's an interesting one. Would I like to be in there? Why not? It's a good one.
Awesome. What's the best gift you've ever received?
The best gift I've ever received is, I've got a few things on my fridge which are gifts by my kids.
Nice.
And there's a rock that says "Dad, you rock."
That's so cool.
Which is so that's one of my sons gave me that. So I think that's the most memorable one.
I love it. So who do you recommend as a guest for a future show from the product team? Is there anyone that kind of jumps to mind, maybe in a different product area, but that you think would have a good story to tell?
Yeah, I think Tulsi might be. Tulsi is a peer of mine, and she has wide visibility into the all Power Platform, and she looks after the user experience of Power Automate as well. And I think she's just a wonderful person, a good thinker, and I think she'd be fun to have on.
Excellent. I'll get you to offline introduce me to her.
Sure thing.
That would be fantastic. Ashvini, it's been great to have you on the show. If people, I don't know if you're on social media or anything like that, or where do people kind of connect with you if you're publishing blog-wise or anything like that?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn, and whenever we end up posting any items on LinkedIn, then usually I update on LinkedIn saying this is where we posted, or on Twitter as well. Ashvini S is my handle. Although, to be honest, after a recent political thing, I don't go to Twitter as often, so probably LinkedIn would be the better place to go.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you've been listening to the show for a while, I'd love it if you'd, give me feedback, and specifically, I'd love it if you gave me some thumbs up on iTunes. So if you just head over there, navigate to nz365guy.com/iTunes, you can leave me hopefully a 5-star review and some feedback. I need to get a few more reviews in there for it to actually start showing up in the iTunes store. So I'd appreciate that. Remember, full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/176. See you next time.